Before we begin this story, I have a question for you. Where in the world are you watching this from? Let me know in the comments below. He had watched the same empty building for years, until a stranger painted the only night he had spent a lifetime trying to forget. The world had seen him as a hero, but in the silence of his own mind, he was a ghost. Michael, a man of 48 years, was not just a night watchman. He was a silent sentinel of his own past. His hands, once strong and sure, now held nothing but a chipped flashlight and a pack of cigarettes he would never finish. He patrolled the brick warehouse, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The air was thick with the smell of dust and old memories, each step a testament to the life he had left behind, a life that ended on one fiery night. That whistle, a small silver echo of a life once lived with purpose, hung motionless from his belt loop. It was a museum piece, a relic of a time when its shrill sound meant hope, meant action, meant life. Now, it was just a weight, a cold reminder of the choice he had made and the one he couldn't. It was the sound he had silenced, along with his own voice, along with his own soul. He had chosen to be a watcher, a guardian of shadows, because that was all that was left for him. To be forgotten, to be invisible, to be a ghost in the machine of a city that had once celebrated his bravery. He was a man who had lost his purpose, and in doing so, had lost himself. He had found his solace in the quiet hum of solitude, in the empty spaces that mirrored his soul. But that morning, a child's voice broke everything open. A sound that was a trigger, a sign of what he had chosen, a reminder of what he had saved and what he had lost. It was in that moment, staring into the broken window, that he realized he wasn't alone in his pain. He was just the one who was brave enough to stay in it. He was a hero in a past life, and now he was just a man with a broken soul. Michael had traded the roar of flames for the rustle of rats, the shouts of command for the quiet drip of a leaky pipe. His uniform, a symbol of honor, was replaced by a tattered jacket, and the firehouse he once called home was a distant, painful memory. He spent his nights counting the broken panes of glass, each one a shard of his former life, a mirror of the man he used to be. The ghosts of the past weren't in the flickering shadows, they were in the empty spaces, in the silence that swallowed his thoughts, in the way he flinched at the sight of a stray match. He had built a fortress of silence around himself, brick by brick, just like the warehouse he guarded. He was a master of avoidance, an expert in looking away. He walked the perimeter with a practiced detachment, his eyes scanning for intruders, but his mind always locked on that one night. The scent of burnt wood and the echo of a final scream were his constant companions, and no matter how much he tried to scrub them from his memory, they lingered like the stale smoke on his clothes. If you've ever lost something that felt like part of your soul, stay with this story. What he finds next might break you in the best way. This isn't just another sad story. It's about what happens when someone finally chooses to feel again. The city had no idea what he had done. It just saw another empty warehouse, another faceless night guard. But Michael knew the truth, a truth carved into the very lines on his face. It was 5 years ago, in a downtown residential complex, a 5-alarm blaze. The heat had been a physical force, a monster with 1,000 fiery arms. Michael and his partner, David, had been in the thick of it, a team for a decade, their trust forged in countless emergencies. They were the ones who went in when everyone else ran out. That night, their bond was tested by an impossible choice, a decision that would forever divide Michael's life into a before and an after. Michael and David moved through the smoke-choked corridors, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The screams from the upper floors were a symphony of terror. David, always the faster one, had gone ahead to clear the stairwell. Michael, following close behind, heard it. The cry of a child, small and terrified, coming from a room on the left, At the same moment, the structure above David gave way with a sickening groan. It was a split second, a fraction of a heartbeat. One way was the child, the other was his brother, his friend. Michael screamed David's name, but the roar of the fire swallowed his voice. He had to choose, and in that horrifying moment the training kicked in, the moral compass pointing to the most defenseless. He went for the child, knowing in his heart what he was leaving behind. He found the little girl, huddled under a scorched bed, her eyes wide with fear. He scooped her up, a small, light weight in his arms. He could still hear the faint, desperate calls of David, now muffled, now gone. He carried the child out, down the collapsing stairs, feeling the heat on his back like a brand. He emerged into the cold night air, the little girl clinging to him, her small body trembling. The world celebrated him as a hero, a savior. But the cheers were a bitter mockery. He had saved one life by sacrificing another, and that guilt was a silent fire, burning him from the inside out, hotter and more destructive than any flame. He never saw David's face again, only the memory of his final scream. The rescue had been his last act as a firefighter. He resigned a week later, unable to face the empty space where David had been. He traded his heroism for obscurity, his purpose for penance. He took the night watchman job because it was the furthest thing from the light, from the noise, from the life he had. He wanted to be a ghost, to blend into the shadows and disappear. The warehouse was his purgatory, a place to exist without living, a place to punish himself with the silence that had replaced the roar of his old life. He was a man who had done the right thing and was haunted by the wrongness of it all. This silent routine, however, was about to be shattered. He was on his rounds when he found him. A young man, no older than 20, standing in front of the brick wall of the warehouse. His name was Ethan, and he had a can of spray paint in his hand. Ethan wasn't breaking in. He was an artist, a ghost of a different kind, painting stories on the walls of the city. He saw the warehouse as a canvas, a place to make something beautiful out of something forgotten. Michael, with his strict rules and his silent pain, was furious. But as he approached Ethan, he saw the image the boy was creating. It was a blaze, an inferno, but not just any fire. It was the fire from 5 years ago. It wasn't a random scene. The colors, the angles, the raw emotion of it all, it was too real, too specific. Michael's breath caught in his chest. He saw the flames licking the windows, the smoke billowing out of the top floor. He saw the fire truck in the foreground, and then a figure, a silhouette of a man. It was a fireman, a ghost in the painting, running into the fire, a figure that was an eerie and painful echo of his own memories. Michael felt a cold sweat run down his spine. How could this young man, a complete stranger, know about this? How could he have painted the scene that haunted his every waking moment and filled his nightmares? Michael was frozen, unable to speak, unable to move. He was a statue of his own pain, staring at a picture of his trauma. Ethan, oblivious to the storm he had just unleashed, continued to paint, his hands moving with a fluid, confident motion. He was an artist, not a vandal, painting a tribute, not an act of destruction. He had no idea he was painting on the wound of the man standing behind him, a man who had given up everything to save a life, and who was now seeing that very moment of impossible choice immortalized in spray paint. It was an act of accidental revelation, a connection formed in the most unlikely of places. Michael wanted to tear it down, to erase the memory, but he was held back by a powerful, unshakable curiosity. Who was this boy? Why this fire? The questions hammered at the walls of his carefully constructed solitude. He had spent years running from that night, and now it was here, in front of him, in living color. He hadn't spoken to anyone in days. But that morning, a child's voice broke everything open. And today, A young man with a can of paint had come to finish the story. He had come to unearth the past, to force Michael to look at the very thing he had spent a lifetime trying to hide. Keep watching. Because this moment, once a fortress of solitude, was now everything. A canvas for the past. Michael watched from the shadows as Ethan worked, his movements quick and purposeful. The boy had no idea he was painting a monument to Michael's personal hell. The more he painted, the more the scene came to life. The flickering flames, the collapsing beams, the blurred figure of a firefighter. Michael saw it all, but with a horrifying new clarity. He saw David not as a memory, but as a living ghost on the wall, and the reality of his choice came crashing down on him all over again. The guilt was no longer a silent burden. It was a loud, screaming, two-dimensional reality. He couldn't leave. He was drawn to it, as if to a car crash. He wanted to look away, but the pain was a magnet. He watched as Ethan added more detail, a flash of red on the uniform, the faint outline of a child's face in a window. Michael's heart hammered in his chest. How could he know these details? Was this some kind of sick joke? A cruel coincidence? Or was there something more? The questions drove him crazy, chipping away at the walls of silence he had so carefully built. He felt a deep, unsettling fear mixed with a strange, undeniable curiosity. He needed to know. He needed to understand. Michael finally approached the boy, his voice a hoarse whisper from years of disuse. "Where did you get that?" he asked, pointing at the mural. Ethan, startled, looked at him with an artist's calm and a youthful naivete. He didn't see a hero or a broken man. He saw an old watchman curious about his work. He explained that his mom had told him the story, had shown him pictures of the fire that had changed their lives forever. She had been a kid then, trapped in that building, and a firefighter had saved her. Michael's stomach twisted. He knew this. But Ethan kept talking, and the world shifted beneath Michael's feet. Ethan said his mom had always talked about the hero who saved her, the man who had carried her out. She never knew his name, but she remembered the whistle on his uniform, the way it glinted in the light. She had always said that sound was a beacon of hope in the chaos. Michael's hand went instinctively to his belt loop, his fingers touching the cold metal of his own whistle. He was that man, the hero. And Ethan, this young man, was the son of the child he had saved. It was a revelation so profound, so devastating, that it took his breath away. The child he had saved had grown up, had a life, had a family, and he was here, painting his story. The photo was a gut punch. It was the first time Michael had seen that moment from an outside perspective. It was the first time he had seen what he had saved, and what he had lost. The pain of David's death was intertwined with the profound gratitude for the life he had saved. He saw the fire not as a moment of failure, but as a moment of impossible triumph. The two truths coexisted, and the weight of it all was overwhelming. He had spent 5 years punishing himself for a choice he had no choice but to make. A choice that had brought a lifetime of joy to a family he didn't even know. He was a hero, a villain, and a ghost, all at once. He finally spoke, his voice cracking. "David was my partner," he said. Ethan's eyes widened. He had no idea he was talking to the man himself. They stood there in the silence of the warehouse, 2 generations connected by a single tragic event. Ethan's art had not only unearthed Michael's past, but had also created a bridge to the very life he had saved. The young man, in his simple act of creating something beautiful, had given Michael a profound and terrible gift: the truth. He had shown him that his pain was a part of a larger story, a story of life and hope, not just of loss and sorrow. This encounter shattered Michael's self-imposed isolation. He had been so focused on the one person he couldn't save that he had forgotten the one he did. He had lost sight of the good he had done, of the life he had brought to safety. He had been so consumed by the darkness that he had forgotten the light. Ethan, with his spray cans and his art, was a small, bright light in the darkness of Michael's world. He was a beacon of hope, a reminder that the world had moved on, that the life he had saved had blossomed, that his sacrifice was not in vain. The mural was not a cruel joke, it was a memorial, a tribute, and a reminder. Michael started to help Ethan, not with paint, but with his memories. He told him about the fire, about David, about the little girl he had saved. He gave Ethan the details to make the mural more real, more authentic. He was, in a way, confessing his past, letting go of the guilt, painting a new story on the walls of his own heart. The act of sharing was an act of healing. He was not just a night watchman anymore. He was a storyteller, a guardian of a different kind of truth. He was no longer a ghost. He was a human, connected to another human being by a thread of shared pain and shared hope. The mural became a joint project, a collaboration between two broken souls. Michael's memories, his pain, his truth were transformed into art by Ethan's hands. The act of creation was an act of healing. He was no longer trying to forget. He was trying to remember and to honor. He was no longer just a man haunted by the past. He was a man building a new future. What would you do if the only way forward was through everything you'd buried? The mural was almost complete. It was a beautiful, haunting tribute, a mosaic of a tragedy and a triumph. For the first time in years, Michael didn't feel the need to hide in the shadows. He stood in the light, a silent witness to a life he had saved and a life he had lost. The pain was still there, a dull ache in his chest, but it was no longer a suffocating burden. It was part of his story, part of his identity. He had a choice to make, to retreat back into the comfortable silence of his solitude, or to embrace the terrifying vulnerability of connection. He could go back to being a ghost, or he could choose to live again, to honor David's memory by not letting his own life burn out. He chose to live. He chose to feel again. He made a conscious decision to not let his guilt define him. He stood in front of the mural, a beautiful and painful masterpiece, and he saw not just David, not just the fire, but a reflection of his own courage. He saw a man who had made an impossible choice, a man who had saved a life, a man who had paid the price with his own soul. He had been a hero, not because he had put out a fire, but because he had had the strength to carry the weight of his decision for 5 long years. He had been so lost in his grief that he had forgotten his own strength, his own resilience. He walked over to Ethan, who was adding the final touches to the mural. "There's one thing missing," Michael said, his voice stronger now, more certain. Ethan looked at him, surprised. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out the small metal whistle. It glinted in the light, a silent beacon. He handed it to Ethan. "This was David's," he said. "His name was David. He was my partner." Ethan took the whistle, his eyes wide with understanding. He had a name for the ghost in the painting now. He had a story, a face, a memory. He had something to honor. Ethan took a can of red spray paint and began to paint, not a flame, not a building, but a single perfect line. He painted a streak of crimson, a symbol of life, a tribute to a man who had given his own. He painted David's name, not in a crude scrawl, but in a careful, reverent script. Michael watched, a single tear running down his face. It was a tear of grief, but also a tear of release. He was not a hero, not a villain, not a ghost. He was just a man who had done his best, who had lost a friend, who had saved a life, and who had finally found peace. He had honored his past, and in doing so, had freed himself to embrace his future. The mural was finished. It was a masterpiece of redemption. It wasn't just a painting, it was a story. It was a testament to the power of human connection, to the way one act of kindness can change a life forever. Michael stood in front of it, no longer a watchman of a building, but a guardian of a memory. A testament to a life lived with courage and a life reclaimed with hope. He felt the cold metal of the whistle in his hand, a small but powerful symbol of his journey. He lifted it to his lips, and for the first time in 5 years, he blew. The shrill sound cut through the silence, a final, beautiful, mournful cry, a signal of hope, a tribute to a friend, a sound of release. He was no longer a man who had silenced his whistle. He was a man who had found his voice again. He walked away from the warehouse, his steps lighter, his head held higher. He wasn't a hero, but he wasn't a ghost either. He was a survivor. He had walked through the fire, and he had come out on the other side not unscathed, but whole. The world might never see him, but he saw himself. He had found his purpose not in guarding a building, but in telling a story. He had found his healing not in forgetting the past, but in honoring it. He had found his home not in a warehouse, but in his own heart. He was free, and his whistle, once a burden, was now a song. He walked away with nothing, except for the one thing he thought he had lost forever: hope. Because sometimes all it takes to save a life is listening when no one else does. The world never saw him, but today you did.